fortified.
Dark light!
Your middle tower is under attack. Your middle tower has fallen. Your middle tower is under attack.
Shadows come. The shadows cast. I'm with you. Confirmed. Askel you'll receive. I go. Sacrificed to shut dark light. Indeed. Not time. Do the wave. From shadow to shadow.
No, not the rest.
The enemy's bottom tower has fallen.
See you in hell.
Of course. Rite of passage. Confirmed. Ah, scepter. We fight. For the shadows. Shiny. Dazzle. On my way. Shadows keep you.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
I go where I
Dire's structures are fortified.
Yes. Askel you'll receive.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
Shadows come. Shadow wave. So this is how I'm with you. Hero.
Double kill.
Pustules.
Murder spree.
You're safe. Out. Dazzle. Dazzle out.
Murder spree.
Renum, I convey your spirit to the Nothul realm. For the order.
The enemy's top tower has fallen.
Dominating.
Another subject for the Wraith King.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
I've been to the place where darkness is
Your
land.
bottom tower has fallen.
Dark light. A spiritual journey.
has fallen.
Dominating.
Become feast for the flesh fly.
Power of a priest.
Double kill. Double kill.
Bless you. I'm under attack.
Sooner
bottom tower is under attack. Your bottom tower has fallen.
Wait for me. Dark light. I cast a long shadow. I'm under attack, of course. I'm with you. Zap. Time. Out.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
Mega kill. Those people had families. Double kill.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
Triple homicide.
Your bottom tower is under attack. Your bottom tower has fallen. Your bottom barracks are under attack. Your bottom barracks has fallen. Dire's structures are fortified. Your middle tower is under attack. Your middle tower has fallen.
your turn to ban. 5 seconds left. Don't freeze up. Seconds remaining. 5 seconds remaining.
Silencer comes to war. Silent running.
Prepare for battle.
Cut a path. Cut to the chase.
Seconds to battle.
I go.
Maybe we could turn the bag into some kind of sail. Then we'd have this thing for
Yes.
sure.
Yes. Silently. Onward.
Let's get moving.
A hush falls on the battlefield. With quickness. I make my move. A step ahead. Silently. Yes. A small price. Ah! I go. As the blades fly. Not a whisper. No. I'm under attack. A step ahead. Ah! Any last words?
your bottom tower.
Yes. I'll make
You win.
Yes. A step ahead. Silently. With quickness. Yes. Not a whisper. Double kill!
Your body was a cage. I just let you free.
I'll hear their screams. Nothing more.
Your middle tower is under attack. Don't let your middle tower fall.
Silent running. Thought I missed. I'm. Onward. I'm
Killing spree!
shuddered. I go. Yes. 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 Yes.
Regeneration.
I go. My edge grows sharper, not a whisper. A step ahead.
Don't let your middle tower fall. Middle tower's down. You just let them.
Dominating!
My life. I make my move. Mega kill!
Double kill!
Soon you die. With quickness. Silently.
shouldn't look. Your top tower is under attack. Why is this happening?
Silently.
An opportunity.
I make my move. Dominating! Holy shit!
Holy shit! Double kill! Mega kill!
Let's talk about your top
Triple kill!
There's really no reason to stand for this. Your top tower is under attack. Radiant structures are fortified.
I
Your
hear the
middle
call
tower is
once
under
more.
attack.
With quickness. Holy shit! Spinning blade. I'm under attack. Unstoppable! Wicked shit! Learn how to swim before you sail in deep water.
Your middle tower is under attack. Your middle tower is under attack. Your middle tower is gone. I tried to warn you.
Hush now. I'm here. Yes. Silent running. I cut a path.
Let's talk about your top tower has fallen. Is this going to be a pattern? Your top tower is under attack.
Enemy of the ground.
Monster kill! Double kill!
Double kill! Or do the same. Holy shit!
Let's talk about your top tower.
Holy shit!
Oh, you will
Holy shit! Double kill!
You really should look at your
Holy
bottom
shit.
tower.
Triple kill!
felt my shit, did you?
I go.
Your bottom tower is under attack.
Yes.
Bottom tower is gone forever.
Silent running. Silence is golden. Let no sound escape. I go. I wouldn't hear of it. Hear me out. Holy shit! Holy shit!
Double kill! Holy shit!
Triple kill! Holy
Radiant
shit!
structures have been snow fortified. Don't let your middle tower fall. You really should look at your bottom tower. you want that to happen. Your middle tower has fallen.
Fresh mate!
Holy shit!
Defend your ancient!
Killing
It's kind of the
spree.
meme of the game.
Holy shit! Double kill!
Your ancient is under attack.
silence.
It's in the bag.
A step ahead.
Just me in here.
I'd get ready if I were you.
Cut to the chase.
30 seconds to battle.
Yes. Not a whisper. I cut a path.
It begins.
A hush falls on the battlefield.
First blood.
First blood.
With quickness.
They sing the song of death.
Silent running. Yes. I cut a path. I go. Not a whisper. Onward. Yes. A step ahead. I make my move. Silently. I've got my ear to the ground.
My heart. It is an honor to be.
Oh, fuck me, dude. My bad.
Something. I go. I make my move. Yes. I strike. Yes. Speak your last. Catch this. I go. I go. Shush. Shut up. Let no sound. I'll cut you down. Yes. Onward. Silently. Not a whisper. Shut it. Silent running. A step ahead. With quickness. Silently. whisper.
Your middle tower is under siege. The enemy's bottom tower has fallen.
Yes. I make my move. I'll take your tribute. Silently.
Your middle tower is being attacked.
Silence is golden. Silent running.
Your middle tower is under attack.
Onward. Cut to the chase. As the blades fly. Axel, I'm under attack. Catch this.
The enemy's top tower has fallen. Not bad. Not as bad, I mean, as your other decisions so far.
Yes. Shut your mouth. I don't even want to hear it.
Dire structures have been fortified.
I go. With quickness. No!
The enemy's middle tower has been destroyed.
Look who's back. Yes,
Your middle tower is being attacked.
I cut a path.
Murder spree.
Too soon.
Your middle tower is under attack.
Quickness. Onward.
Down we go!
The phantom
Crush.
I hope you're proud of yourself.
I cut a path. Yes.
Your middle tower is under siege.
Shut it. Advancement.
Your middle tower is being attacked.
Yes.
Your middle tower has been
I
denied.
make my move.
Did you win? I don't have the first clue what's happening right now. What about those things? The tree people things. Are they important?
I wouldn't hear of it. Silent
Your bottom
running.
tower is under attack.
A step ahead.
Your bottom tower is being attacked.
Murder spree.
Not
Double
a whisper.
kill.
Silently.
Your bottom tower is under siege.
straight.
Yes. I make my move.
Oh, jeez, your middle tower's under attack.
Let no sound escape. Silently.
Oh, jeez, your middle tower's under attack. Come on, get with it.
I'm under attack. Yes.
Great, your middle tower, you can't use that anymore. It's gone.
Yes.
Wait, no, hold on. He's unstoppable.
Morty, middle tower. You might want to look at it.
Middle tower's under attack.
Oh, your top tower's under attack. Uh-oh, monster kill. Watch out, Morty. Heads up.
Heads up for me. You gotta get serious. Stop, Rick. It's
Well,
as good as he does.
Godlight, you're loving this. They're Godlight should be the mayor of I Told You Town. They're swarming your top barracks right now.
Well, you don't have any top barracks anymore.
Silent running. Coin for me. There is less to be heard. Silently. The silence deepens.
Holy shit! Oh, jeez, they would be on Godlight.
Calm down.
He's still got Godlight.
Double
No,
kill.
stop. I'm getting angry about this. They're fighting against your middle barracks right now.
Double kill. Oh, man. Looks like dire structures are fortified.
Silently. A step ahead. Hear me out. I make my move. Advancement. Shut it. Onward. I go. With quickness.
Your bottom tower's under attack.
Cut you down.
Your bottom tower is gonzo, baby.
Silently. Yes. Cut to the chase.
Oh, your bottom tower's under attack.
Yes.
Hey, Morty, guess what's not there?
The bottom tower.
Shut your mouth. Silent running. Yes. Yes.
health is your biggest asset.
These are 3 unique Manscaped trimmers, all designed for different parts of the body. The Lawnmower 4.0 is perfect for your nether region, but it also works great on any...
They're all top.
Commendable notion.
Brother.
Very well.
The battle begins.
We are in accord.
I think it's a good matchup. I'm not sure. I think I'd be pretty happy.
Very nice.
If I was a Necro in this lane.
With alacrity. I
I need
proceed.
Troy. Come, Tusk. Go, go. Tusk, 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 Tusk.
I venture forth.
Radiant's courier has been
Tusk is not
killed.
listening.
My move.
I like you.
He's I'm being ignored.
Your
Think
middle
about
tower is
travel.
under attack.
I venture forth. Exactly so.
Brother.
I proceed. Commendable notion. Silence.
Courier.
Stay near. Behold. We are in accord.
My shadow falls.
Nice.
Just
Kick
so.
by, noobs.
We are in
Get some
accord.
yelly. Kill him. Go.
Interesting.
Go, I kill.
We are in accord. Silence. I'm out. Here I am. With
Bye.
alacrity.
Omni's here. Let's go, Omni.
Bye-bye. Greetings. Cold stiff. Just so.
Catch up.
Huh? Silence. Exactly. Short. Gather round. Attack.
I did that.
Silence.
I did that.
Behold.
Forgot how good I
I
am.
venture forth.
I forgot how good I am. Good. We're gonna go and kill a build. A legendary puck build. Can't die, you just kill everybody. It's pretty easy.
Radiant
anything else, like-
structures are fortified.
Tons of them.
Your top tower is
Very
under
well.
attack.
After them. Silence.
Oopsie.
Don't run. Stay near.
Your bottom tower
Get
is
out.
under attack.
There's a pig. But I can't die with this
Fair
build.
game.
Radiant's courier has been
He
killed.
really wants me.
Behold.
Oh shit.
It is no
Does a puck die?
matter.
Yikes.
Let's get the tower.
I'm down there. I
Strength.
can't control
Here I
it.
am.
Is it gay
Got
to
him.
imagine yourself being a
Commendable
girl and
notion.
getting
In his
piped?
prime.
Yes, definitely.
I go. Silence.
No way.
The enemy's bottom tower has been denied.
I proceed.
Got to
You
deny.
know nothing unless
He's deep in there. He's
Radiant's
stuck.
courier has been killed.
Get him.
Very well.
Out, I'm taking middle.
Okay.
With
Nothing wrong with being
alacrity.
gay though.
Just so.
Holy moly.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go back to farming then.
got it.
Silence. I am under
What a save.
Gather round.
I cannot believe you are pushing 40 and still got it, man. I mean, at least you got the skills because I know your hairs are
I
gone.
need help. Please help me, please.
Commendable notion. Silence.
Oh my god.
Huh?
I missed it. He missed it. Okay, me too.
Yes, we have a support farming creeps.
The enemy's middle tower
Go, I
has
have a-
fallen.
Got them.
Go.
Alo Badok, happy 29 years. Will be the same age as her soon despair.
I venture
dazzles darken.
Behold!
Holy shit.
With alacrity.
They have a sentry here.
This is a good
Very
bit of a
well.
gulp.
Any murder?
Dire's structures are fortified.
Silence! Up, huck out! Greetings! Attack!
Let's kill
Okay,
him.
well, he doesn't have.
I am under attack!
Get some.
Silence!
Hmm.
Huh? I go at will.
Got him. I got Lincoln. I can't die.
Absolutely.
It's not good.
Oh, that's worth it, I think.
I carry a hammer. Hail, great guardian, watch over us.
Is Axe one of the weird heroes where status resistance doesn't work? I forgot. Status resistance does not work against Berserker Call. Anybody know? Why would that be the case? That is so weird. Quick Roche.
My move. Commendable notion. Silence! The vessel
Bottom
proves
is
useful.
Help him!
Well,
Oh, no, no, no. Oh, wow!
haste! We are in a fray.
Tip the
Oh,
tusk.
it's a pause.
I'm tipping tusk for this one. Well played, Tusk. Well played.
Very giga chat only.
Die with honor.
Good job, team.
Just so. Silence! Bye-bye! I raise my
Dire's
gaze.
turret
pussy, let's go.
I am under attack.
Oh, what the?
Oh my god, what is happening?
Got a bloodthorn now. I'm coming. Just wait.
Huh?
I'm baiting them. I'm baiting them.
Greetings!
Axe is spawning though.
Very well. Silence! My turn.
This is just shameful.
And amuse me. Stay straight.
Oh, wow.
Why is he so boomer? Why can't he just press face shift?
Silence.
Let's get that cheap pussy.
Greetings.
Does this look like a pussy move?
Exactly so. Behold silence.
Got it.
Brother.
Just
Do it,
so.
brother. I'm gonna win. We're gonna win. Trust me. Trust me.
Absolutely. The best.
Bubble, 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 bubble.
Boom. Oh. Ooh,
No,
breaks
why
under
would you
it.
take me?
My move.
I did that.
With alacrity.
He died to my. He died to my
What?
skeleton archer.
I
Wait,
venture forth.
how long did it
He
last?
shifted to 0 HP. He shifted to 0 HP and then died to it.
I read your life.
Here.
How long did the skeletons last?
Like 30 seconds, 20 seconds, I don't know. It's a while.
I did that.
Presumably.
Holy shit.
Alive.
I
So
perceive.
close.
Radiant structures are fortified.
Fair game.
Yeah, kill it. I'll TP.
We don't need you, you're useless.
They shall
Not a
regret
projection.
this.
Pretty high.
Oh no.
Silence. Huh?
Shield me. Shield me, you fucking.
What the hell are you doing?
Stay and amuse me.
Your middle tower is under attack.
Oh my god. One more.
What was that damage? Any brothers here? Take a tower?
I venture forth. I'm in silence. Behold!
Your bottom tower is under attack.
I venture forth. I am under
through. What? Oh my god, I had duels.
Tusk is griefing. Also reporting this guy, please.
I was dead. What do you want from me?
Omni Knight, can you report?
So you think you know Wix, but do you really? First up, we've got Shade.
For this video, we're calling the classic era just any cards released before Synchros. And in this, we're going to look at some of the worst quick plays of these older cards. Starting us out at number 10, we have the Reliable Guardian. This quick play spell targets and raises the defense of a monster by 600 points until the end of this turn. Defense boosts are just not that good overall, even back when battle tricks were actually relevant. And this just happens to be the worst version of that effect. The reason why this card's attack counterpart, Rush Recklessly, actually saw some play is simply due to how combat mechanics line up in Yu-Gi-Oh! A defense boost will almost never allow you to trade up and remove an opponent's monster for using it. And while it may let you keep a monster around and do some damage to your opponent, you're always going -1 in the process. Though, there are cards that make it so that a higher defense monster will destroy an attacking one with less attack. That's still really underpowered for a 2-card combo though. The Reliable Guardian never even had a niche as the Rush Recklessly for monsters that can attack while in defense, because these all came out much after stat modifying effects were all that relevant. The truth is, there are just several better options you could be running to protect a defense position monster. There are many battle traps that also remove your opponent's monster while stopping the attack. And if you really want specifically battle protection, there are traps to protect your whole field instead. Even if you're a defense-focused deck filled with cards like Stone Statue of the Aztecs, which does double the damage an opponent takes when attacking into it, you'd be better off with cards that reduce your opponent's attack like Mirror Wall instead. If you look into the modern card pool, then we'll have the likes of Rise to Full Height and D2 Shield to double the monster's defense instead. This is just a really old card that was already outclassed in release, and much more now. And at number 9, we have Guard Penalty. This spell lets you target one monster on the field, and if it's changed to defense position this turn, draw a card. Just to get out of the way, you can only draw a single card with the spell, even if you somehow manage to change the monster's position multiple times. Now, drawing just a single card is already a valuable effect in of itself. Upstart Goblin has seen tons of play throughout all the ages of the game, and even its trap version, Jar of Greed, used to be viable in the past. So why is this card bad? Well, there's just a pretty big rift between a free draw one and a conditional one like this, no matter how easy the condition is. You need either a monster on the field that's already been there for a turn, or a card that changes battle position available. While that's not that hard to assemble, it's infinitely times more difficult than other draw spells, which just need you to activate them. Not only that, but it also gives your opponent an avenue to interact with your draw one, which can lead you to getting 2 for 1 easily. Think about it this way, no one's going to stop your Upstart Goblin, but if they see you activating Guard Penalty in one of your monsters, they might be very tempted to spend removal on it in response. It's quite hard to make a draw one effect be bad at Yu-Gi-Oh!, but this card manages to do so perfectly. And at number 8, we have Ring of Defense. This quick play spell can be activated in response to the effect of a trap that would inflict damage, and it makes the effect damage 0. This card is obviously meant to be a counter to Burn, which was once a really feared strategy. The issue is that it just doesn't do its job very well. The first problem is that the best burn cards usually inflict damage while also doing other stuff, like Ring of Destruction popping the monster, or Magical Cylinder negating the attack, both of which would still have their effects go through after Ring of Defense. Additionally, many of the best burn cards are spells like Wave Motion Cannon or monsters like Death's Koala. If you wanted to actually counter burn, there are just so many better options you'd never think of slotting this card anywhere in a deck. Barrel Behind the Door can be used on spells, traps, and monsters, and not only does it cancel the damage you take, it also sends it back to your opponent. If you want to get around more than just one single trap, you can also just run Royal Decree instead as well. which could be used to beat a wide variety of decks too. At last, if your issue is that these previous two are trap cards that need to be set for a turn, there's always Des Wombat, which straight up prevents you from ever taking effect damage while it's on the field and only needs to be normal summoned. As a narrow card made to counter a specific deck, it doesn't even do that well, and so was severely outclassed even back in 2004. And at number 7, we have Jar Robber. You can only activate this card in response to Pot of Greed, and then you negate it and draw a card. If there's one card you never want to see resolved on you, it's Pot of Greed. That easy +1 can swing the tide of almost any duel. No wonder then that Pot was banned all the way back in 2005, only to never come out of the Forbidden List again. This much would have already made Jar Robber into a card that's completely useless for the last 20 years and will continue to be, as the card is never coming off the list. Still, even when Pot was legal, it was always limited to 1, meaning you weren't even guaranteed to see it throughout a duel. Not only that, but why bother playing a card that can only negate that, when at the time Pot was legal, you could also play Solemn Judgment at 3. Sure, there's a bit of a bigger upside in negating a Pot with Jar Robber, but it's so much better to have the flexibility to negate any other card too instead. That's always been the issue with these highly specific countercards, and why none of them ever saw play. Call of the Grave, Anti-Raigeki, White Hole, and Griffin Wing are all counterparts to Jar Robber for Monster Reborn, Raigeki, Dark Hole, and Harpy's Feather Duster instead. And odds are, you've seen a few of those in the worst of lists already. The only thing that separates Jar Robber from the rest of them is that it's a quick play spell instead of a trap, even if that doesn't make much sense, because it's not like your opponent is ever going to be activating a normal spell in your turn anyway. Pot of Greed might be one of the strongest cards in the GOAT format, but this is simply not a good way to beat it. And at number 6, we have Monster Recovery. This quick play spell targets a monster you control that is owned by you, and shuffles it and your entire hand into your deck, and then draws you cards equal to the number of cards shuffled from your hand by this effect. While getting access to what's essentially a mulligan has the potential to be a pretty good effect, letting you shuffle back your bricks and such, this card just makes you -2 way too hard to ever be worth it. Since you only get to draw a card for each card that was in your hand at the time, and need to get rid of one of your monsters to activate it, you're always going -2 for that effect. On top of that, the extra clause saying it needs to be a monster that's owned by you also prevents you from comboing this with steal effects like Mind Control. If you really wanted to refresh your hand, you could be running Card Destruction instead, which is just a -1 and lets you set up graveyard synergies as well. On top of that, if you go just a couple of years after this card was released, there'd be Reload, which is pretty much just the same card, but without needing to shuffle back one of your guys. The small added benefit of this card is supposed to be that you can chain it to monster removal, so that your monster won't get outed, but rather sent back to your deck, when you'd eventually be able to draw into it again. But this isn't even that good, as unless it's banish removal, monsters are generally more accessible from the graveyard than from the deck anyways. There are valid reasons to want an effect like this, and Card Destruction, Reload, and Magical Mallet have seen quite a bit of play due to it, but Monster Recovery is just so much worse than the rest of them that it's not even worth looking at. Did you know that on June 8th, I'll be debuting my VTuber Corp to the world on Twitch? Link in the video description. Did you also know that if you have 8 named Crystal Beast monsters out, you can't summon Rainbow Dragon? Rainbow Dragon requires 7 different
T-Mobile savings, take one. Focus. Here's the line. At T-Mobile, you get tons of benefits and you can still save versus
different named Crystal Beast monsters on the field and in the graveyard. And because of this wording, if you have an 8th one out, you no longer meet the conditions for its summoning condition. Make sure to follow Glitch Stars on Twitter and YouTube and Twitch, all links in the video description. And at number 5, we have Soul Reversal. This card returns 1 flip monster from your graveyard to the top of your deck. Soul Reversal is one of the few ways to recycle flip monsters the game had back in the day. But just because it's unique doesn't mean it's good. Even for GOAT format standards, having to go -1 to not even get the monster back during the same turn is just way too slow. If you're looking at this card as part of a 2-card combo with something that draws to let you reuse a strong limited monster like Magician of Faith, it's still pretty bad. It'd be way better to just figure out a way to discard a Night Assailant consistently instead. Even a deck that's super reliant on their flip monsters like Empty Jar would sooner run Shallow Grave, which summons the monster to the field instead. And even in these 2 cases where Soul Reversal is heavily outclassed, we are only looking at its contemporaries from way back in the day. By advancing just a bit further into the timeline, you get way better ways to get monsters from the graveyard back to the hand, like Monster Reincarnation and Drill Warrior, who can recover in non-flips too, and without waiting a turn for it. The only other use for Soul Reversal is comboing it together with cards that you need to call to the top of your deck, like Reversal Quiz and Archfiend's Oath. But you can know what's there with much less setup involved with Convulsion of Nature instead. Getting a flip monster spun back to the top of your deck with Ryza or Phoenix Wing Windblast was always a soul-crushing move that sets you back on tempo enough for you to lose a duel on the spot. And Soul Reversal lets you do just that, except to yourself and not your opponent. And at number 4, we have Bubble Shuffle. This spell targets a face-up attack position elemental hero Bubble Man you control, and an attack position monster your opponent controls, and changes both to defense position. Then you trigger your Bubble Man and special summon an elemental hero from your hand. This card asks for just a bit too much of you for what it gives off, as if needing a specific monster in the field wasn't enough, it also wants your opponent to have an attack position 1, and you need to have an elemental hero in hand to activate it as well. While Bubble Man is at least leagues better than a lot of the other elemental heroes, and even packs a special summoning edition, it only began to see play once Xyz became a thing. So it was never a monster you wanted to end on your side of the field. While an old school elemental
Do not fall for these tourist traps in Japan Part 2. Firstly, do not fall for fancy terms used at popular tourist attractions like Kobe beef or A5 Wagyu. We had Kobe beef nigiri for 1,400 yen per piece at Dontonbori, and it tasted like every other cut of beef that we've tried. We also tried A5 Wagyu at Tsukiji Market. This cost us 3,300 yen for one skewer. The beef was okay, but it was definitely more of a tourist attraction location, so they know they can hike up the price. Instead, go to this spot in Tokyo which specializes in omi beef. Secondly, it's Animal Cafe. We went to a few animal cafes in Japan. It was definitely an experience and they were all so cute. But as you spend more time inside, you start to realize that the animals are actually really anxious and stressed out. Thirdly, it's Google ratings. Places that are rated highly on Google are sometimes overhyped. And also keep in mind that Google ratings can be bought. You'll be surprised some places with lower Google ratings are actually really good. And a bonus is there is no line. So don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone and try new places. Follow for more travel tips, and I also post daily. Do not মা একটা ইনগ্রেডিয়েন্ট চুজ করো
Just 3 ingredients and 5 minutes stand between you and the cutest summer treat. This strawberry lemonade sorbet is made with just freshly squeezed lemon juice, frozen strawberries, and honey or agave. You can serve it up right away for a soft serve texture or scoop it into lemon halves and freeze for a few hours. Tag us if you make it and check out our other videos for more easy and approachable summer recipes. Just
No, you're never a bother. Get help for yourself or a friend at neverabother.org.
You on my mind a lot. Don't need no time watch. I don't know how I got you in my pocket spot.
Difficult TCGs to get a grasp of. And with this much depth comes rules. And boy, does Yu-Gi-Oh! Have a lot of rules. But not all rules existed since Yugi first summoned Dark Magician. Some of these rules were added or changed due to players thinking they had outsmarted the game itself. So here are 5 times Yu-Gi-Oh! Players had a hand in official tournament rules being changed. In the year of 2007, Upper Deck Entertainment, the company that ran tournaments before Konami did, announced the German National Championship. 2 fedora-wielding individuals walked in with a 2,222 card deck. Everybody's heads turned as these 2 individuals walked up to the front desk with their 2,222 card deck and slapped down a deck list with over 100 pages and say, "We would like to enter the tournament." Now you would think, how does one even play with a 2,222 card deck? Well, you see, they built this huge contraption that they used in order to stack their deck onto it without it falling over and allowed the player to get ready to duel. You would think, why? Why would any player want to show up with a 2,222 card deck? Well, the players didn't show up to try and win the tournament.
What?
They were actually 2 judges that wanted to get a rule changed. Per the rules at the time, their deck was fully allowed to enter the tournament. So with their huge contraption ready to go, they sat down at their first round, and would you believe, they built their deck not to be optimal or to try and win. They actually built their deck with a bunch of cards that all forced the deck to be shuffled. The entire plan was that because their deck was so large, every time they would need to shuffle, it would take borderline hours to shuffle the deck entirely even a single time, to the point where it would be randomized enough for the deck to be legal to present to the opponent and continue the duel. At one point, one of the tournament organizers went up to them and kindly asked them if they would drop out of the tournament. They understood that what the players were doing wasn't against any of the rules, but it was actually impeding on the tournament for the rest of the players, and the players respectfully agreed. Roughly a year after this event, Konami actually implemented a deck size limit, and players can now play with anywhere between 40 and 60 cards in their deck, and we have these two individuals to thank. On March 7th of 2015, ARG Fort Lauderdale was taking place. Now, for those of you that are unaware of what an ARG is, it's an unofficial series of tournaments that was run by a store called Alter Reality Games, hence ARG. On this day at ARG Fort Lauderdale, Patrick Hoban, one of the best players in the world at the time, was a reigning national champion, was playing Necros, which is a ritual deck that was considered to be the best deck of the format, but he was playing something a little bit special in his deck. Now, to understand the card that Patrick Hoban was playing, you need to understand the concept of floodgates. Floodgates are types of cards that basically do not allow the opponent to play a certain type of card. In his deck, Patrick Hoban was playing Djinn Releaser of Rituals, and Djinn Releaser of Rituals basically made it so that any ritual monster that was ritual summoned using the Djinn as a material would prevent your opponent from special summoning anything while that ritual monster remains on the field. Now, Djinn Releaser of Rituals wasn't a hidden card by any means. Pretty much every Necros player in the room had it in their deck, so Patrick Hoban and his team came up with an idea. His plan was as follows. Anytime he would play against a Necros player in a mirror match, he would offer to his opponent when side decking to side out the Djinns. The way a gentleman's agreement like this would typically work is both players would agree to side out a specific card, they would take it out of their deck and place it on the side face up, so that the opponent could very visibly and clearly see that that card was in fact sided out. Now here is where things get a little dicey. Mr. Hoban had a second copy of Djinn Releaser of Rituals in his side deck. So should anyone take him up on the gentleman's agreement to side out the singular copy of Djinn, Patrick Hoban would take the second copy of Djinn that he has in his side, put it in his deck so that he was the only player playing with a copy of Djinn Releaser of Rituals.
They might have a chance. Yeah, and there they go, agreeing to side out the Djinns.
Now, when doing research, it actually turns out this never worked.
I think they're both X2. Yeah. Yep.
With that being said, a lot of players were arguing about whether or not this should even be allowed in the first place. A very recent update that happened in the past couple of years actually implemented an entire category about gentlemen's agreements. The primary reason why this isn't allowed per the rules is because Konami doesn't want any player to reveal any form of private information, and removing a card from your deck face up does reveal private information, but there's a very strong possibility that this rule was actually changed because of this Patrick Hoban Djinn story being as popular as it was. And for that reason, this rule has been changed ever since, and this is not allowed anymore.
Your health is your biggest asset. Find Anthem Blue Cross plan starting at $0.
Moving on to something a little bit more technical. This is less so a play that happened by a single player, and more so a play that happened by the entirety of the player base. So certain cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have effects that allow you to attempt to guess a card from your opponent's hand, guess a card that's in your opponent's deck in order to do a specific action. Now, it's important to note before we move on that Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have any fail-to-find rules, and previously, any card that would make you guess a card out of your opponent's hand or guess a card out of your opponent's deck required a verification. So for example, if I'm activating Ordeal of a Traveler and my opponent needs to guess what type of card is in my hand, if they select a card and then they call spell, I would have to show them the card in order to reveal to them whether or not it is a spell. This led to a very interesting scenario where certain cards actually had bonus effects that weren't written on the card. And the most important card for this situation is Mind Crush. Mind Crush is a very powerful card that allows you to declare a card, and if your opponent has that card or multiple copies of that card in their hand, they need to discard that copy or those copies of that card. Now, the reason this influenced Mind Crush a lot is specifically because Mind Crush would have the additional bonus effect that if your opponent had the card or didn't have the card in their hand, they would need to reveal their entire hand to prove to you that they do not have that copy or that they do not have multiple copies if they've only discarded a single copy of the card. Because of how much this buffed Mind Crush was a card that was in so many players' side decks, it was everywhere. There were a lot of players at the time that were advocating for Mind Crush to get banned because of this, and Konami actually listened, and on April 3rd of 2019, they pushed out a tournament policy update changing the entirety of the hand and deck verification rules. Another facet of the hand and deck verification rule was the fact that if I activate a card such as Reinforcement of the Army thinking that I had a warrior monster in my deck, and I actually picked up my deck and didn't have a warrior monster at all, I would have to hand my deck to my opponent for them to verify that I actually do not have a legal search. So the new update that they made to the hand and deck verification rules actually changed a lot. It made Mind Crush significantly weaker and removed the entire deck verification in general. So basically what the new rule was if you declared a card such as Mind Crush and you declared a card in their hand, they would simply discard or not discard and you would not verify their hand. You would simply need to trust that your opponent is not lying. I'm going to take you guys back on a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Upper Deck Entertainment ran tournaments known as Shonen Jump Championships, or SJCs, with rules that were kind of different to those that we have today. Official tournaments were always played with time rules, but the way those time rules were handled back in the day was very unique. Nowadays, matches can end in a draw under certain circumstances, but back in the early 2000s during SJCs, a match could not end in a draw and a winner needed to be determined at all times. So there were a couple of players at the time that studied these end-of-match rules and determined that there were a couple of flaws that were very exploitable. And those rules that are very exploitable are the following. 1. A match cannot end until a player has won 2 duels in a match. If a duel ends in a draw, you simply proceed to the next duel, and whoever chooses who goes first in the previous duel chooses again. And 2. If time is called during a match, whoever has the highest life point total after 4 turns would win the current duel. So with these flaws in mind, these players came up with a perfect strategy to take advantage of these end-of-match procedures. A deck centered around the card Self-Destruct button, a card whose sole purpose was to cause duels to end in a draw. So their strategy was simple. Utilize Self-Destruct button alongside cards that set your life points really low, such as Wall of Revealing Light, in order to force duels to end in a draw over and over and over again until the round's timer has ended. To compare this with today's procedure, if enough duels end in a draw, the match will be determined to be a draw. Now you might be wondering how these players would win if all they're doing is causing draws. Right before the timer runs out, these players would side deck out of their Self-Destruct button strategy and side in cards that increase their life points or lower their opponent's life points in order to win via the end of match time procedures, rather than by reducing their opponent's life points to 0. And the reason why this strategy worked is that per the time rules at the time, once the timer is over and the time rules are called, players are no longer allowed to side deck, meaning that these players will swap into their strategy right before the timer's called, and the opponent cannot swap their strategy to take advantage of the time rules and win in time. Now you might be thinking, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is no stranger to strategies intended to cheese out wins, so why would this cause any sort of rule change? There's actually 2 logistical issues with decks like these.
Count 'em, 2.
As we know, Konami doesn't like it when outside factors begin playing a part in a player winning or losing a match. The end-of-match procedures exist to make it so rounds don't go for unbelievably long, not for someone to basically stall the match all the way to time in order to essentially unlock a new win condition. And the second reason is that a deck like this could realistically continue to cause draw after draw after draw.
I got so frustrated with ads on YouTube, I was watching more commercials than content. Privacy Ad Blocker was a game changer. Installation was a breeze, and it actually worked. Now, I watch videos without annoying interruptions exactly how it should be. The difference is night and day. No ads means no
draw even after the round time has ended, resulting in everyone in the room needing to wait on the conclusion of a single match for the next round to begin. Now, while there's no direct proof that this deck is the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments later ended up allowing for matches to end in a draw, there are many reasons that point to that being the case. There's even a little bit of speculation that Upper Deck's tournament software simply didn't allow the option to mark a match's result as a draw, and that this was only changed once Konami took over from Upper Deck in 2009 and added the draw option to the tournament software. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think they added draws because of this deck, or do you think it was just something they had to implement? If you're interested in more details about how this strategy worked, there's actually an entire thread on Pojo detailing exactly how to play this deck. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're interested in looking at it. In card games, sometimes you have trolls that find loopholes in the rules to do something funny, but others find loopholes to help them win in unconventional ways. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, there are some rare instances where card effects can loop infinitely, and the way those are handled has changed over the years. In order to understand this rule change, we need to understand two concepts: a controlled loop, as well as the concept of an uncontrolled loop. A controlled loop is essentially a loop where a player has multiple effects that they can just choose to activate in any sequence or order that would loop infinitely. An example of this would be if a player finds some way to make their Gale Dogra a psychic-type monster, they can equip Telekinetic Charging Cell to it and basically allow for the not once per turn effect of Gale Dogra to be used an infinite amount of times. Now, how would you loop this? You can use Gale Dogra to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, and then use Gale Dogra again to send Psyframe Lord Omega from your extra deck to the graveyard, and then use the Psyframe Lord Omega to return itself and the first extra deck card that were sent back to your extra deck. This causes one perfect infinite loop that basically can be activated by the player as often as they would like. The way controlled infinite loops are handled is that if a player has a loop such as the Gale Dogra loop that I represented here, they can basically perform it once to prove that it is an infinite loop that can be done again and again, and then they simply tell their opponent how many times they wish to reproduce the loop, and then afterwards they need to just continue with the game and do something else. So those loops are actually totally fine and completely allowed in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of decks such as Six Samurai utilize infinite loops. It actually doesn't add a lot of time to the game itself because you can just declare how many times you want to do it and then perform it that number of times. Now, on the opposite hand, there are uncontrolled loops, and uncontrolled loops are named that way specifically because they are caused by a bunch of continuous effects applying at the same time in a way that they constantly apply and reapply and reapply in a way where the game cannot continue because these effects are constantly reapplying. So an example of an uncontrolled loop is, say I control a copy of Jinzo that belongs to my opponent that I stole with my own copy of Snatch Steal. This Jinzo would be equipped with my opponent's amplifier. If I activate Imperial Order, the following would occur. The Imperial Order would apply, negating my Snatch Steal, making it so that my opponent takes back their Jinzo. But now because they control their Jinzo while they have Amplifier, my Snatch Steal will now reapply because Imperial Order gets negated by the Jinzo, making it so the Jinzo returns to my side of the field. But now because it's on my side of the field, my Snatch Steal is now negated by the Imperial Order and returns to my opponent's side of the field, and so on and so forth in an infinite loop that cannot be stopped by any means because these are a sequence of continuous effects that continue to apply and stop applying and reapply and stop applying and reapply and stop applying and reapply and stop applying and reapply. Now, I know what you're thinking. Coder, there's no way this happens even remotely often in tournaments or anything like that. And you know what? You'd be right. Correct! The most famous instance of this actually occurred on my stream. At one point, I was taking judge calls on Dueling Book, and I hopped into a call where a player had a very interesting board setup. So in this judge call, what happened is that the player in question controlled and invoked Purgatrio, a monster that gains 200 attack for every single card on the opponent's side of the field. They also controlled a monster that had 2700 attack that was also equipped by Phoenix Blade, which would buff its attack up to 3000. However, there was also a pole position on the field, a card that says that the monster on the field with the most attack is unaffected by spell effects. So currently they control the Purgatrio at 26 and the Battle Shogun at 27. The Battle Shogun is equipped with a spell card, but it's currently unaffected by that spell card, so it's not receiving the attack buff from that Phoenix Blade. In this very particular instance, anytime the opponent would so much as place a card on the field, it would cause the Purgatrio's attack to go from 26 to 28, making it so that the Battle Shogun is now no longer unaffected by the Phoenix Blade, so the Battle Shogun's attack will go up to 3000, making it the monster on the field with the most attack, making it so pole position renders that monster unaffected by the Phoenix Blade, so it would go back down to 27, but then the Purgatrio still has 2800 attack, so now the Battle Shogun is once again affected by the Phoenix Blade, basically rendering it illegal per the game rules for the opponent to so much as place a card on the field. Now, I posted this judge call to my YouTube channel and it blew up. Other content creators such as MBT Yu-Gi-Oh! Made some videos about this as well.
Seriously, why?
I'm playing a combo deck whose win condition is calling a judge over to your table, and it doesn't work online.
Now again, Konami doesn't actually explain why they change certain rules or why they make updates to the tournament policy, but coincidentally, the next tournament policy that occurred literally a year after this video went up, Konami changed the rules to infinite loops that are uncontrolled. Initially, what the rules were is that it was illegal to make a play that would cause an uncontrolled infinite loop to begin. However, post the new policy update, they actually changed the rules to make it so that if an uncontrolled loop is caused in any way, shape, or form, a judge is to be called and the judge will determine which of the cards currently on the field is the most responsible for causing the infinite loop, and that card will immediately be sent to the graveyard so as the loop stops and the duel can continue. Let me know in the comment section below if you like this type of video. This is the first video essay that I've done, and I'm genuinely really interested to do more of these, so if there's any topics in particular that you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear your feedback on this video, and without further ado, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
No, you're never a bother. Get help for yourself or a friend at neverabother.org.
Yugi Bodo was the king of games for a reason, as not only was he a tactical genius, he held a special bond with his cards that allowed him to bring out the latent potential hiding in even the weakest of monsters. This fact was even highlighted by Yugi's use of Kuriboh, a monster so puny that most opponents laughed when he brought it to the field. But even when compared to his favorite furball, Yugi played a ton of terrible cards. So today, we're going to look at some of the worst cards in Yugi's deck, how he managed to bring out the potential, and why duels in the TCG have struggled to do the same. And at number 10, we have Brain Control, a surprising entry that allowed Yugi to turn his opponent's best monsters against them. And that's because the anime version of Brain Control lets you pay 800 life points to target and take control of an opponent's face-up monster until the end of the turn, with no other restrictions or downsides. This made Brain Control a busted card in the anime, especially in the hands of Yamayugi, who showed just how absurd mind control cards can be when using it in a ton of interesting ways. One such way was by using their Stolen Monsters tribute fodder for the summon of his own boss monster, which removed a potentially powerful monster from their side of the field permanently, while also allowing for Yugi to immediately strike back with his new threat. Another way was by turning the attack strength of those monsters against his opponent, not just by attacking with them, but also attributing them to the effect of Catapult Turtle. But Yugi's most iconic use of Brain Control was definitely in his duel against Merrick's mind-controlled puppet, Strings. You see, in this duel, Merrick had virtually won, as not only had he managed to bring out Slife of the Sky Dragon, he also had an unbreakable wall set up with a Revival Jam, Jam Defender, and Card of Safe Return. This meant that even if Yugi somehow managed to bring out a monster that could defeat Slifer, Jam Defender would cause Revival Jam to take the hit instead. And because Revival Jam would immediately reform and return to the field, it would trigger the effective Card of Safe Return, drawing Merrick 3 more cards and strengthening the attack of Slifer even further. But Yugi had one more trick up his sleeve to break this illusion of infinity, Brain Control, which he activated after attacking with Buster Blader. Merrick initially laughed at the idea because an Egyptian God card was far too strong to be controlled, but Yugi was targeting Revival Jam, which reformed on his side of the field, allowing for Merrick to draw 3 more cards. This seemed like a strange play at first, as it only strengthened Slifer's attack points even further. That was at least until Slifer's second mouth effect was forced to activate, reducing Revival Jam's attack points to 0 and destroying it, only for it to reform again and cause Merrick to draw another 3 cards and for Slifer's second mouth to trigger again over and over. This formed an infinite loop which forced Merrick to keep drawing cards until he eventually decked himself out and lost the duel, thanks to Yugi's clever use of Merrick's mind-controlled monster. And the funny thing is, mind control cards have always been amazingly strong for similar reasons to how Yugi used brain control, which is why the card used to see a ton of competitive success, especially because when compared to other mind control cards, brain control was one of the best as it had very few restrictions on what you could take and what you could do with that monster. So with all that in mind, why is brain control such a bad card? Because it's been errated to be virtually unplayable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! You see, prior to 2017, Brain Control could target any face-up monster your opponent controlled, including their extra deck monsters, which gave it a ton of versatility as you could steal anything from a tuner to make an extra deck monster to a boss monster that you could tribute off for a monarch. But after its errata, Brain Control could only target monsters that can be normal summoned or sent. This excludes a bunch of powerful monsters from Brain Control's clutches, but most importantly, prevents you from being able to target extra deck monsters at all. This simple change turned Brain Control from a ban-worthy card to one of the worst mind control options available in the modern era, as most strategies build an end board by using their extra deck tools rather than ending on main deck boss monsters. That's not to say it's impossible for Brain Control to be useful, as there are tons of strategies that end on normal summonable monsters that you could steal with Brain Control, but even then you're better off playing the other, better mind control cards that have a lot more versatility in what they can steal. Brain Control is simply outclassed in the modern game, which is definitely a shame since it's such an iconic card, and it's kinda sad to see that it's such a shadow of its former self. But at the very least, similar mind control cards help to showcase what made the original Brain Control so busted. Shining at number 9, we have Mystical Moon, an equip spell that even Yugi struggled to use well, which is funny for such a simple card, as in the anime, all it did was equip to a beast-type monster you control to increase its attack and defense by 300 points, which is slightly different to the TCG version which only equips to a beast warrior monster. But the anime version of Mystical Moon had one major difference to its TCG counterpart. Because it was a moon, its gravitational field influenced the tides and could cause the sea level to rise. This was a huge issue, as the only time Yugi used Mystical Moon was in his duel against Mako Tsunami, a duelist that specialized in using the ocean to harbor terrifying sea creatures that Yugi couldn't see as they were hidden beneath the watery depths. So when Yugi equipped the Moon card to a Silverfang, he made a huge mistake, as it caused a tidal wave which increased the influence of Mako's monsters and reduced the landmass that Yugi could summon on to just 5%, leaving him stranded with only a giant soldier of stone to protect him as Mako's monsters surrounded it, ready to strike. But despite these overwhelming odds, Yugi was a genius tactician, and to Mako's surprise, he switched the Giant Soldier of Stone to attack mode. This move didn't make too much sense at first, as Giant Soldier can't attack Mako's life points or the monsters hiding beneath the ocean, but Yugi wasn't aiming for either as his target was the moon. This caused the tides to dissipate after the moon's destruction, leaving Mako's monsters stranded and helpless in dry land while Yugi's summoned Cursed Dragon delivered the final blow. This is definitely one of Yugi's silliest but most fun victories, and one that highlighted the difference between the early anime and the TCG, as in the actual game, Mystic Moon can't cause the tides to rise or fall when your opponent has Umi on the field, and all it does is increase a monster's stats. There were a lot of similar equip spells in the early days of the game and the anime that did similar things for different types and attributes and could theoretically give your monsters an edge over your opponents, but in practice, most of these equip spells have a ton of issues. They have the same problem as most equip spells. They can only buff one monster at a time, unlike a field spell, and if the monster they equip to leaves the field, you lose an extra card for no reason. But the game's best equip spells that buff stats mitigate these issues by being generically usable, and providing such a strong buff for a monster that they were basically equivalent to a removal spell which used the battle phase that also made your monster hard to beat over and OTKs easier, which is why cards like United We Stand and Mage Power both spent time in the Forbidden Limitless. However, the same can't be said for a card like Mystical Moon, as it can only be equipped to a Beast Warrior monster, but even if you were running a deck of only that type, you'd still rather equip a card like Mage Power, as Moon only provides a meager 300 attack buff. And while that might be enough to give you a slight edge, it's definitely not worth the card investment, or the possibility of the tides turning against you. Moving into number 8 is Stronghold the Moving Fortress, the boss monster of Yu-Gi-Moto's gadget strategy. For a boss monster though, Stronghold was somewhat unique, as it was actually a trap monster that was summoned to the field by activating it like you would a regular trap card. And usually it has pretty weak stats with 0 attack and 2000 defense, but while red, green, and yellow gadget are on the field, it gains 3000 attack. This combination of stats meant that Stronghold was the perfect combination of defense and offense, a fact that was put on display in Yugi's final duel of the original series against Atem. This duel had a lot on the line, because not
Hershey's milk chocolate with whole almonds. Holy delicious. Holy Hershey's.
With MetroFlex, I get a free 5G phone when I join.
And I can get the same great deals as new customers when I stay.
Not only was it a chance for Yugi to prove that he was strong enough on his own without relying on his partner, but if Atem had won, then he'd be locked out of the afterlife for another 5,000 years. And so, when Atem turned Yugi's own green gadget against him for direct attack, Yugi intercepted it with Stronghold to defend his life points. Then, on the following turn, Yugi summoned out his other gadgets, who began to pilot Stronghold and increase its attack to strengthen it to an astonishing 3,000, which was so strong of a monster that Atem needed to bring out Obelisk the Tormentor to defeat it. Although in the TCG, you wouldn't need an Egyptian god card to deal with Stronghold. Trap monsters in general are pretty hit or miss, and while some do manage to show the potential behind the idea, cards like Stronghold expose their main weakness. They're terrible as monsters as they need to be set for a turn before you can use them, and they usually have pretty lackluster effects, which makes them bad as trap interruptions. But even amongst trap monsters, Stronghold is terrible, as while other trap monsters have somewhat interesting effects to justify their use, Stronghold is just a vanilla monster, and a pretty bad one at that, as it needs each of the 3 original gadgets on the field to have any kind of threatening offense. Now, the gadgets themselves are actually pretty solid, and have seen competitive play in older formats as they're easy to summon monsters that constantly generate advantage, giving you a Congo line of resources to eventually overwhelm your opponent. But decks that revolve around gadgets never use Stronghold, as the strength of these strategies was the replicability of the gadgets, making it really unlikely that Stronghold would ever reach 3,000 attack points. You could technically use Stronghold like Yugi did as a defensive option to block an opponent's attack, but overall it's really lackluster as an option, and a terrible boss monster that's even worse at being a trap card. Sealing the number 7 spot is Time Seal, a card that allowed for Yugi to defeat the invincible Exodia, because Time Seal is a trap card that can skip an opponent's next draw phase, meaning that they don't actually get a draw for a turn, which was pretty vital in Yugi's duel against Seeker the Rare Hunter, who had managed to defeat Joey and steal Red Eyes for him thanks to the anti-rules of Battle City. Yugi attempted to win Joey's Red Eyes back, but wasn't allowed to be clued into the Seeker strategy. However, when Seeker began playing defensively to stall the game, Yugi quickly figured out that his plan was to bring out the Forbidden One, a plan that he almost achieved, as Seeker was only 1 card away from assembling the 5 pieces. But as he was about to draw the final piece, Yugi activated Time Seal to prevent him from drawing for a turn, giving him just a little bit of extra time to formulate a plan to do what most duelists thought was impossible and defeat Exodia. And in terms of iconic moments, Yugi's defeat of Seeker is definitely up there, especially after he tore up his Exodia cards after realizing they were all fake. But the way Yugi used Time Seal actually doesn't work. You see, Time Seal's effect skips your opponent's next draw phase, and because it's a trap card, it needs to be set for a turn before you can use it, so you have to pass turn in order to activate it. But your opponent's very first phase is the draw phase, so before you get a chance to activate Time Seal, your opponent has already drawn a card, and it's their next draw phase that gets skipped, meaning for that turn, it's basically done nothing. And even though Time Seal is such a terrible card, it's still limited on the ban list to this day, likely because skipping your draw phase is usually a pretty toxic effect, as cards like Yatagarasu managed to prove with the infamous Yata lock, which left your opponent with 0 cards in hand and no way for them to draw for a turn. This situation could technically be recreated by looping Time Seal, but it would take a lot of effort and a ton of resources to do so, and on its own, it doesn't do anything to lock an opponent out of the game. And more likely than not, they're going to be able to use the 6 cards they have in hand to OTK before they even get to the next draw phase. So overall, it's much easier to play better cards to control your opponent's hand to mimic Yugi's victory over Exodia, as Time Seal doesn't cut it, and is one of the worst hand control options the game has to offer, and is probably one of the worst cards still on the Forbidden Limited list. Charging into number 6, we have Battle Steer, a card that proved that maybe his grandpa's deck had a couple of pathetic cards. Battle Steer is a level 5 monster, and so requires a tribute to be normal summoned to the field, and doesn't have an effect since it's a normal monster with flavor text that describes it as a bull monster in the woods that charges at enemies with its deadly horns. Horns that give Battle Steer a pretty mediocre 1800 attack. Now, Battle Steer definitely wasn't a staple of Yugi's strategy, as he actually only used it a single time in the first episode of the anime against Seto Kaiba, where Kaiba showcased his mastery over different types of cards by increasing Sagi's attack to 1800 with the effect of negative energy. This let Kaiba go on a rampage, as Yugi was forced to keep setting his weak monsters for Sagi to immediately destroy them, and one of the monsters that Yugi set happened to be a Battle Steer, which, because of the rules of the time, didn't need a tribute to be brought out to the field. But this might have been a huge misplay, as Battlesteer actually had the same attack as Sagi, so Yugi could have crashed into the clown rather than relying on its worst defensive stat. Although, maybe the King of Games was simply 10 steps ahead, as by playing defensively, he eventually survived enough turns to draw the 5 pieces of the unstoppable Exodia, and eventually go on to win the duel. Now, Yugi's deck was no stronger than vanilla Beatsticks, but Battlesteer is probably the worst normal monster that Yugi has ever played. And a huge part of that is because Battlesteer is a level 5 monster. This wasn't a problem in the Duelist Kingdom arc, as high level monsters didn't need a tribute to be brought out to the field. But in the actual TCG, it being level 5 meant that in the early days of the game, it was a pretty big investment to bring to the field. And while 1800 attack was pretty big in classic Yu-Gi-Oh!, there were a ton of other high level monsters with better stats that you would rather spend the tribute on. In fact, even level 4s, monsters that don't require tribute, would eventually go on to have stats that matched or were even higher than Battlesteer's, so it was never worth summoning. And unfortunately, the same is true in the modern day too. Because even though normal monsters have a lot of powerful generic support, most of the support doesn't benefit Battlesteer. Its level's too high to be used with the likes of Unexpected Die. Its type and attribute means that it doesn't really work well with the best decks designed around using normal monsters, and even if you specifically need a level 5 Earth Beast Warrior normal monster, you could just play Rude Kaiser instead, who has a slightly better defense. So overall, it makes sense that Battlesteer is such a forgotten part of Yugi's arsenal, and was so bad that it might have even caused the King of Games to misplay. Peering into number 5 spot on this list is the Eye of Truth, a trap that gave Yugi perfect information on his opponent's hand. And that's because Eye of Truth reveals your opponent's entire hand, but during each of their standby phases, if they have a spell card in their hand, they gain 1000 life points for free. And Yugi managed to show off how valuable hand information could potentially be in his second duel against Seto Kaiba. For Kaiba, this duel was everything. Not just because he was staking his pride, but because winning this duel was the only way he'd be able to save Mokuba from Pegasus control, which is why he changed up his strategy quite a bit from his first appearance. And Eye of Truth allowed Yugi to expose that strategy, as after activating it, Yugi saw that Kaiba had been holding a Blue Eyes in his hand the entire time. This confused Yugi, as Blue Eyes was Kaiba's ace card, and it didn't make sense for him to keep it in his hand rather than just bring it out to the field. But that's when Yugi figured it out. Kaiba was planning on getting all 3 Blue Eyes to hand so he could bring out this ultimate dragon, an almost undefeatable monster. And so Yugi reorganized his entire strategy to play aggressively to defeat Kaiba before he could bring that monster out. However, even the Eye of Truth was blind, as it couldn't see Kaiba's future draw, Crush Card Virus, which meant that when Yugi destroyed Sagi by battle, every powerful monster in his deck would end up getting destroyed. Interestingly enough, in the TCG, Eye of Truth does let you figure out your opponent's strategy like Yugi, but much like how it went down the anime, by the time you get to use it, it's probably too late. Hand information as a whole is quite valuable, as with knowledge of your opponent's hand, you know the right hand traps to play around, what deck your opponent is playing, and what type of end board you need to build in order to beat them. So cards that give you that knowledge as a bonus can be amazing, to the point where sometimes, if you use an effect to reveal your opponent's hand, there's a chance they immediately scoop, so that it makes sighting more difficult since you don't know what they're playing. However, because the TCG version of the Eye of Truth is a trap card, you don't get the same benefits that you usually would, because by the time you get to activate it, it's already your opponent's turn. So you don't get the opportunity to play well around the cards they have. And even if you steal that knowledge, there are a myriad of better cards that let you see your opponent's hand while recovering cards from it, such as the Virus trap cards. So as a whole, Eye of Truth does virtually nothing. And while it can make you feel as smart as Yugi when you understand your opponent's strategy, it's likely that your opponent already has what they need to take you down. Focus at number 4 is Marshmallow Glasses, a continuous spell that proved vital in Yami Bakura's defeat. These glasses cover the eyes of your opponent's monsters, and make it so that while Marshmallow is on the field, they can't see its friends and can only attack Marshmallow, which is pretty fruitless as Marshmallow can't be destroyed by battle. And in a strange way, Marshmallow and their glasses represented Yugi's desire to protect his friends above all else, which is why he refused to give them up to get the Pharaoh's real name, and why Marshmallow appeared to Yugi in his imagination duel against Bakura, where all cards both players drew were born from their imagination. And in this duel, Marshmallow acted as an indestructible barrier, but was even stronger when paired with Marshmallow Glasses, as with both on field, Yugi could guarantee the survival of his other monsters, such as Silent Magician and Silent Swordsman, 2 monsters that started out weak, but if protected, would eventually level up into overwhelming boss monsters that go on to Bakura's demise. All of this was made possible thanks to Marshmallow's protection, which perfectly mirrors Yugi's main motivation of trying to protect things he valued most, and what he wished for when he finished Millennium Puzzle, his friends. And funnily enough, in the TCG, Marshmallow actually did a pretty good job of embodying this spirit, as in the early days of the game, it was a genuine defensive wall that was quite difficult to remove, and its 1000 burn was pretty substantial. It made it a great stall tool in burn strategies. The same can't be said for Marshmallow Glasses though. Preventing your other monsters from battle can be a positive effect in theory, but in practice, these glasses are entirely reliant on you already controlling Marshmallow, and on its own, it literally does nothing. But the worst part is that Marshmallow Glasses has some anti-synergy as well. You see, in order to get the most out of Marshmallow, it's best to set it on the field in face-down defense position, which protects you from battle damage, and can also cause your opponent to trigger Marshmallow's burn if they attack into it. But while Marshmallow is set, Glasses can't vary.
Pain hits fast, so get relief fast. Tylenol Rapid Release Gels.
Verify that it's in your monster zone, so your opponent can still attack your other monsters. And the only way for Glasses to immediately protect those monsters is to normal summon it in attack position and risk damage to your life points. Or hope that your opponent flips up your Marshmallow so you can use Glasses on turn 3. So as a whole, Marshmallow Glasses does virtually nothing by itself. And even if you happen to draw it with Marshmallow, it's a really risky move to leave such a weak monster in attack position. And if you want to protect your monsters from battle, there are a ton of easier cards to use. Slash into number 3 is Dark Flare Knight, a symbol of the unwavering bond held by Yugimoto and Joey Wheeler. And that's because Dark Flare Knight is actually a fusion between both of their ace monsters, Yugi's Dark Magician and Joey's Flame Swordsman. You don't take any battle damage from battles involving Flare Knight, and if it's destroyed by battle, its Blazing Heat summons out Mirage Knight, a monster that can only be summoned by the effect of Dark Flare Knight. And when Mirage Knight battles, it gains attack equal to the original attack of the monster it's battling. But during the end phase of the turn where this card attacks or is attacked, you have to banish it. And in the anime, these monsters had a really impressive showing when Yugi and Joey used them in a last-ditch effort to defeat the Big Five. In this duel, Joey was desperate to prove his strength as an individual duelist, especially since the Big Five had mocked him for being the weaker player between him and Yugi. But in the end, Joey realized that his friendship with Yugi was never a weakness, and it would be them working together, not their individual strength, that would win them the duel. And nowhere was this more apparent than when the Big Five summoned Five-Headed Dragon, an imposing boss monster that, according to the Big Five, could only be dealt with by Dragon Master Knight. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, Joey chose to trust in Yugi, and so summoned his deckmaster, Flame Swordsman, willingly putting his fate into Yugi's hands. And Yugi didn't disappoint as he summoned his own deckmaster, the Dark Magician, and fused it with Joey's Flame Swordsman to form a new monster, Dark Flare Knight, who he immediately crashed into Five-Headed Dragon. This seemed like a crazy move at first, but Joey chose to trust in Yugi once again, and he was rewarded as Dark Flare Knight then floated into Mirage Knight, a light monster that reached an insane 7,800 attack points which easily cut down Five-Headed Dragon, and would have won both Yugi and Joey the duel if it hadn't been for a deal with the Dark Ruler, which summoned out Berserk Dragon, but even that monster was easily defeated after Yugi put his faith into Joey's hands, who used Knight's title to help Yugi summon out Dark Magician Knight. Unfortunately though, even a bond as strong as Yugi and Joey's isn't enough to make these cards playable. And that's because Dark Flare Knight, Mirage Knight, and even Dark Magician Knight are all incredibly difficult to summon, and require you to jump through a ton of hoops to bring them out to the field. Dark Magician Knight requires you to commit a Dark Magician to the board, and then use Knight's title, whose only use is summoning Dark Magician Knight, to Tribute DM, which is a specific 2-card combo that requires some pretty bad cards. And both Dark Flare Knight and Mirage Knight aren't any easier. You see, Dark Flare Knight requires 3 specific cards of investment, a fusion spell, Dark Magician, and Flame Swordsman. And while finding Dark Magician polymerization is very doable, Flame Swordsman is a bit more difficult to bring out, as unlike its anime counterpart, the TCG version of Flame Swordsman is a fusion monster with 2 specific materials. Now, thankfully in the modern era, bringing out Flame Swordsman to the field is a lot easier than it was in the past, now that you can instantly summon to the field with something like Instant Fusion or Fusion Armament to make Dark Flare Knight a little bit easier to bring out. But even then, it's not really worth it, as Dark Flare is basically just a vanilla whose only use to be destroyed by battle to summon Mirage Knight. Mirage Knight is also a terrible card. It's super bricky because it can only be summoned by Dark Flare Knight, and even if you manage to bring it out to the field, its effect is only good for attacking over a single monster, as during the end phase, Mirage Knight banishes itself, meaning that all the investment you put into summoning it is just gone. Thankfully, the strength of Yugi and Joey's bond is better represented in the TCG by Red Eye's Dark Dragoon, because otherwise Mirage Knight, Flare Knight, and Magician Knight don't really have the strength to convey the power of their friendship. And drawing into number 2 is Card of Sanctity, one of Yugi's strongest comeback cards, but not the TCG version of this card, which can draw 2 cards but forces you to banish every other card in your hand and field to do so. Meanwhile, the anime version of the card is a lot better, as instead it causes both players to draw until they have 6 cards in hand. And so in the anime, whenever Yugi was low on cards in hand, or needed a specific combo to escape a situation, Cardist Sanctity came in clutch to give him the cards he needed in order to stage a comeback. And this came up a number of times in some of the most important duels, but it was Yugi's duel against Noah Kaiba where we got to see how powerful drawing 6 cards could truly be. In this duel, Yugi had picked up from where the defeated Kaiba had left off, and combined both of their decks to take on Noah. But Noah had Yugi on the ropes, as no matter what he did, Noah always seemed to have a counter ready and used his spirit monsters to whittle away at both Yugi's life points and card advantage. And to make things worse, Noah also began to turn Yugi's friends into stone for every turn he couldn't defeat him. This made Yugi feel like things were hopeless, as not only were his friends suffering for him, but he felt like there was no way for him to possibly win the duel. Until the other Yugi invited Yami inside of the puzzle, where the memories of his friends encouraged him to fight on, which gave him the strength to draw a card of Sanctity and draw 6 cards to fight back with their hopes and dreams. And the cards he drew turned out to be the specific 6-card combo he needed in order to defeat Noah. First, he activated Polymerization and fused together 3 of Kaiba's Blue Eyes to form the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Then, he used Quick Attack so Ultimate Dragon could attack that turn and destroy Hino Kagosuchi. And last but not least, Yugi used Defusion to summon out 3 Blue Eyes from the graveyard and OTK Noah by using all 3 to attack him directly and win the duel. Now, a 6-card combo like this is rarely going to happen in the TCG, but this moment manages to show off how busted the anime version of Cardist Sanctity is, as each individual card you draw in the TCG has the potential to turn the duel around in your favor. And for a lot of decks, especially in the modern era, it's pretty easy to empty out your hands so that you draw a ton of cards for free, so it makes a lot of sense the TCG version of Sanctity would end up being nerfed. But there is no bigger downgrade in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, as the TCG Sanctity was made to be downright unplayable. It does still draw you 2 cards, but those 2 cards require that you banish your whole hand and field. So in the best case scenario where you only have to banish Sanctity from the field and a card in your hand, you're going card neutral. And at worst case scenario, you're banishing all of your resources just to draw 2. Drawing 2 cards can be strong, which is why a lot of similar cards have spent time in the Forbidden Limitless. But in most cases, the cost of Sanctity far outweighs its potential benefits. And even if you're a deck like Thunder Dragon that can technically gain advantage from their cards being banished, these decks have easier, less resource-intensive ways of banishing the cards they need. So even though the anime version of Sanctity was busted, the TCG version is one of the worst draw spells ever printed, as even decks that can gain something from their cost would rather play a better consistency tool. But even with how bad Cardist Sanctity is, there's still one more card that Yugi played that's almost impossible to use. And aging into number 1 is Dark Sage, a dark magician that has been aged by 1,000 years by the effect of Time Wizard. And that's translated to be its effect, as Dark Sage can't be normal summoned or set and must first be special summoned from your hand or deck by tributing a dark magician you control after calling the coin toss of a Time Wizard correctly. And if you manage to summon it, you can add any spell card from your deck to your hand. This effect is actually amazing, but it was so difficult to summon that even Yugi was only able to bring it out once in his Duelist Kingdom duel against Joey. This duel was a love letter to the pair's rivalry and friendship. Both players knew that the other was fighting for their family, but out of respect for their bond and honor as duelists, they refused to hold back against one another, and gave us one of the most iconic and heartfelt duels of the series where we got to see Yugi treat Joey like a true opponent, and just how far Joey had come thanks to Yugi's help. In fact, Joey almost managed to defeat Yugi, and used every one of the lessons that the King of Game had taught him to leave him with just a Dark Magician on the field. And so when he drew Time Wizard, the card that Yugi had gifted him on day 1 of Duelist Kingdom that had allowed Joey to win so many duels prior, he decided to leave it up to fate to determine who the winner would be. And luck smiled on Joey, aging his baby dragon into 1,000 Dragon, and causing Dark Magician to turn into a frail old man. This shocked Joey, and he couldn't believe that he was about to beat his friend, and so attacked with 1,000 Dragon to win the duel. But luck was no replacement for the intense amount of knowledge that Yugi held, as he revealed that Baby Dragon wasn't the only monster that transformed under Time Wizard. And because of the passage of time, Dark Magician had gained knowledge of all spells to become Dark Sage, which meant that he could stop 1,000 Dragon's Nose Breath with Makyu. And with tears in his eyes, Yugi used Dark Sage once again to add Monster Reborn to his hand to summon Black Skull Dragon and attack for a game, only for Joey to smile and accept his loss, thankful that his friend never held back against him and gave him a chance to prove that he was a true duelist. But understandably, this victory was upsetting to a lot of people, as everything seemed like it was building up towards Joey's win so that he could save his sister, only for that illusion to be shattered because in effect he could have never have known, to the point where some people jokingly say that Yugi was playing the long game and intentionally gave Joey Time Wizard, knowing that someday he'd use it to defeat him. This definitely wasn't the case, but when you look at how terrible the TCG version of Dark Sage is, it's pretty easy to see how someone could reach that conclusion. Now, if you actually get to summon Dark Sage, its effect is blatant.
Lots to do? Grab a payday. and cut your appetite in half.
Blatantly overpowered, as there are a ton of busted spell cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And getting to search any of them on summon gives you a bunch of incredible options that can give you such an overwhelming advantage that it'll just win you the game on the spot. Which is why Triple Tactics Thrust, a card that can search out any normal spell or trap card, sees a ton of competitive play. But the issue with Dark Sage is that there's no guarantee that you'll summon it. You need to invest the resources into summoning both Dark Magician and Time Wizard to the field. This can be difficult to do, but isn't impossible. But the real difficulty is that you need to call Time Wizard's coin toss correctly, which no matter what you do is always going to be a 50-50 chance. Call it correctly and you get access to Dark Sage and its busted effect, but call it incorrectly and your entire field gets wiped by Time Wizard, and you take a bunch of burn damage and Dark Sage remains sleeping in your deck as a useless brick that can't be summoned through any other means. Now, theoretically, there are a number of ways to almost guarantee that you can summon Dark Sage by setting up an infinite loop to keep bringing both Dark Magician and Time Wizard back to the field each time you fail. But these combos are so fragile and jank that they'd never be considered in most decks. And strategies that use these kinds of loops would rather just FTK you straight away than summon a terrible boss monster. So while Yugi has played a lot of useless cards throughout the series that do almost nothing or are even a detriment to his strategy, there's no doubt that Dark Sage is the absolute worst, because despite how good its effect is, it's almost impossible to summon and never worth the investment. Which is why Yugi never summoned it out again across the entire series. Alright, and that's the list. Yugi played a lot of terrible cards because the game was just still in its infancy, so it was quite difficult to bring this list down to just 10. So if you think we've missed even some worse cards, or have ideas for other characters you'd like for us to cover next, please let us know down in the comments below. In this list, we'll be going over the worst cards that require 2 tributes, which basically means we'll be going over level 7 or higher monsters that can't special summon themselves, and are not inherently part of an archetype that revolves around special summoning them. And at number 10, we have Maju Garzette. This is a level 7 monster which requires 2 tributes, and its effect is that its attack becomes the combined original attack of the 2 monsters that you tribute for its tribute summon. So if you have 2 monsters in the field that have abilities that allow them to come out into the field easier but with a lower attack power value, like Beast King Barbaros, or monsters with high attack that restrict other attacks, like Malefic Cyber and Dragon, then you could tribute both of those cards in order to get a super strong Maju Garzette in the field. Tributing a Beast King Barbaros and a Malefic Cyber and Dragon would result in 7,000 attack, for example, which definitely sounds more impressive than it actually is, because this is all requiring a tribute summon to accomplish, playing those kinds of cards and getting them on the field in the first place, and then of course there's the whole problem with the card that it has absolutely no inherent protection. So if your opponent just has any form of disruption, then you're basically just painting a huge target on this card's back, because you have to put in a lot of resources in order to get it out as a big beat stick. There are other versions of this card which are a lot better, like Great Maju Garzette, which is a level 6 monster that only requires a single tribute, and when you bring it out, it has double the attack of the monster tributed. So, in the same examples I gave for Maju Garzette, if you instead just tributed a single Malefic Cyber and Dragon for Great Maju Garzette, you'd have an 8,000 attack beat stick on the field, while using 1 less card. And Great Maju Garzette isn't that good either. There's also the legendary Maju Garzette, which is much better as it can special summon itself from the hand by distributing all the monsters you control. Then it gains attack equal to all the original attacks of the monster distributed, and it also has piercing battle damage, so it's just much better of a bigger beat stick than the
Refresh the summer vibes with Tic Tac.
normal Maju Garzette. And the legendary Maju Garzette actually saw some competitive play in a deck that was trying to turbo out number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon. Although Maju Garzette is just a way too slow, very vulnerable level 7 monster, where every single other card that's similar to him is much better, especially Grand Maju Daiza, which has seen the most amount of play out of all of the Majus. And at number 9, we have Sword Hunter. This is a level 7 monster, which has the effect that if it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can equip every monster it destroys to this card as an equipped spell card, where it gains the effect to give this monster 200 attack. So if it destroys a single monster by battle, its attack will go up to 2650, which is still kind of low for a 2 tribute monster, seeing as level 6 monsters can get up to 2500 attack. And while the effect is a unique one, where it equips monsters it destroys to increase its power, it's very obviously an early Yu-Gi-Oh card, which is...
Hello everybody, this is Talon, starting a new series that's basically a top 10 without ranking because honestly I already do enough of that. In full transparency, this is probably going to be a lot more laid back than the other series on this channel, but I think that'll be a nice change of pace personally. Anyway, I've had a decent amount of people ask me to go over what I personally eat on a regular basis, and I feel like it could be interesting to do a brief dive into my own diet, explaining my thought process behind it. So today I'm going over 10 foods that I eat almost every day. I can't quite claim every single day with all of these, but if I don't have them at least 6 times a week, something probably went wrong. I'm going to go over the foods themselves, how I implement them into my day-to-day life, what roles they fill nutritionally, and how they fit into the overall scheme of my meal plan. What I'm hoping you get out of this video is a more realistic approach to nutrition, that the best way to tackle goals is to find a balance between healthy and enjoyable for sanity's sake. Before we start, go ahead and let me know down in the comments what's a food you eat every day and why. And with all that said, here are 10 foods that I eat almost every day. First up, we've got ginger. Now, gingers may be God's greatest gift to this earth, and ginger the food is not half bad either. The most commonly consumed part is ginger root, which I'm honestly not sure whether to classify it as a vegetable or a spice, as you never really eat too much of it. Fortunately, most of the benefits of ginger you can get from just a few grams a day. The main benefit as it pertains to me is that several studies have shown the consistent consumption of ginger is shown to combat inflammation and delayed onset muscle soreness post-exercise, and it usually only takes about a couple weeks for noticeable results. I used to have a huge issue with post-workout soreness, and it not only made it physically more difficult to get back to training or even just physical activity, it also made me a lot less motivated to do so. So I started doing a bit of digging into habits and foods that could help me with this, and as a whole, it's dramatically helped. I'm not only less sore and in less pain, but it also takes place over less time. Now, this doesn't mean that ginger is some miracle food. This is more of a small dent that I repeat every day until it makes a bigger difference over time. A diet that you can follow consistently is going to be more beneficial than trying to take on all your problems at once. But beyond combating soreness, ginger kinda dabbles a bit in all of the health benefits. The main active compound is gingerol, which is responsible for most of ginger's health and medicinal properties. These include antioxidant effects, increased insulin sensitivity, anti-osteoarthritic effects, reducing joint pain and stiffness, lowering of blood sugar and the risk of heart disease, treatment of symptoms of chronic indigestion, increased serotonin levels, which are linked with reduced anxiety, reduced LDL cholesterol, prevention of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, anti-cancer benefits, notably in the liver and pancreas, antimicrobial benefits combating bacterial and fungal infections, and not that this really applies to me, but ginger is also shown to reduce menstrual pain and pregnancy-related nausea. I personally take just a pinch, a couple grams a day worth of pickled ginger, the stuff you get with sushi. And ginger is one of the only foods on this list that I can truly say I eat every single day, and a big reason why is that it's just so easy. Next is cinnamon, a spice with a similar concept as ginger, one that's intended to be eaten just a little daily to make a significant difference over time. The main benefit of cinnamon for me is that it's shown to boost insulin sensitivity, insulin being the hormone used for transporting sugar to the bloodstream. So cinnamon effectively supports blood sugar control and has a natural fat loss aiding effect. But beyond that, cinnamon is also shown to boost metabolism, prevent cognitive decline and neurodegenerative diseases, combat bacterial and fungal infections, and it's rich in anti-inflammatory polyphenol antioxidants. The thing that I love about cinnamon is that it goes on so many foods that you're already eating or realistically should be eating. Oatmeal, yogurt, coffee, tea, pumpkin, sweet potato, peanut butter, honey, protein shakes, pretty much anything that's even vaguely sweet, cinnamon goes really well with. Now this is very important. There are 3 main types that come to mind when I think of cinnamon. The first is cinnamon sugar, and I don't think I need to tell you that this is not what I'm talking about. The second is cassia cinnamon, and this is the most common type, though it is linked with liver issues in excess. And the last is Ceylon cinnamon, and this is the one that you really want. It's more natural and is generally shown to be safer in larger quantities. Again, cinnamon is not something that you should be consuming a ton of anyway, but a tablespoon throughout the day can go a long way. And that's really not that hard because it just tastes so great in so many things. Straying out of the spices territory, next up is eggs. I eat eggs almost every single...
Yeah, I like to swing. and I like to get cash back when I swing. Cha-ching.
Day, usually in the form of scrambled eggs at breakfast. Eggs are among the most nutritious foods on Earth, containing a notable amount of nearly every essential nutrient. The main highlight being protein. Eggs are my personal go-to breakfast protein because while I do love me some sausage or bacon, they are often so fatty and the calories do add up, so I don't have them nearly as often. Eggs are a very easy to consume protein, which I would argue is the most essential nutrient, especially for those who perform regular exercise. While straight egg whites go all in on protein, whole eggs, which I actually prefer, have a decent amount of fat as well, which is needed for brain and nervous function. And both of these are great for satiety, which I especially appreciate at breakfast, giving you a filling feeling until your next meal. This alone would be enough to sell me, but eggs go above and beyond by being rich in the brain-boosting choline, several B vitamins, and antioxidants like selenium, lutein, and zeaxanthin. Basically a perfect food that was destined to make this list. And sticking in the protein realm, next is white meat, usually in the form of chicken breast and turkey breast. I have been very clear about how important I believe protein is, especially in a world where I'm trying to build or retain as much muscle as possible, and there is no better source of easy lean protein than white meat. For me, they're on the cheaper end, and they're easy to prepare, and they're versatile, so I never really get bored of them. You don't need to have steamed or broiled or plain grilled chicken every single day to build muscle. Those days are out. And this is a big reason why I believe learning to cook is so important, because sometimes there's some foods you just can't avoid. But if you can find a way to make it fresh often enough, suddenly your necessary evils become opportunities to experiment, and it can actually become quite pleasant. Pleasant is not a word I thought I'd ever be using to describe chicken breast a few years ago, but here we are. I guess that's just personal growth. The reality of it is, if you have any kind of aesthetic or athletic goal, there should be some form of dedicated protein on your plate. And I personally choose to include what I believe is the very best. That's not to say I don't like my meat to have a bit of flavor, because yes, I do eat red meat almost every day too. And this is usually in the form of lean ground beef. It's still very high in protein, but comes with more of that essential fat and certain micronutrients that aren't as prominent in white meats, like certain B vitamins, zinc, and heme iron. But the most important thing really is the flavor. I love beef. Homemade burgers, beef burrito bowls, beef pastas, most anything. It really makes protein consumption so much easier for me. I personally usually have some form of white meat for lunch and red meat for dinner, or vice versa, and this really only ever gets interrupted when I have fish or some other seafood, which I am always open to, but my wallet often isn't. Drifting back to the plant foods, next up is avocado. Easily my new favorite fruit, mainly due to versatility. You can literally use avocado in anything, and I do pretty much every day. With sandwiches, burgers, eggs, burrito bowls, sushi, avocado toast, guacamole, the options are basically limitless. And it just so happens to be one of the most nutritious fruits out there. First off, being very rich in oleic acid, a heart-healthy monounsaturated fat that makes feeling full a lot easier. It's very rich in fiber, and it's a solid boost in many micronutrients that I know I personally wasn't consuming enough of until I fell in love with the avocado. The only potential issue is that it's pretty calorically dense, so portion control is something that I have to keep an eye on, but honestly, I don't see avocado ever not being a staple of my diet. Now the next is the drink that I consume the most, and that's milk. The main reason being I just really like milk. I never quite grew out of that phase. As far as what kind of milk, it really depends. I have no problems with the fat in whole milk. Fat is a necessary nutrient, and as long as you account for the extra calories that it's going to contribute, I say go right ahead. If you're looking to cut back on a few calories, reduced fat milk, skim milk, these are great ways to do it. A big reason why I have so much milk is that it's just so convenient. Using it in oatmeal, protein shakes, eggs, or just a straight up glass of it because it tastes good. And when I find myself drinking a lot of milk, I'll make an active effort to get a lower fat option. Milk is one of the most reliable ways to easily fill in protein gaps, and at times I do rely on it pretty heavily for that. But the benefits of milk go beyond that, filling in key micronutrients that are easy to overlook, notably calcium, phosphorus, B vitamins, and when fortified as it often is, vitamin D. Milk is just another one of those things that I don't think I'm ever going to stop enjoying on the regular. And filling in right after milk is cheese, another food that in my opinion just makes everything taste better. I tend to go for cheddar and Swiss, though that's mainly just a taste preference. Cheese is overall a very nutrient-dense food, but the trade-off is that it's very calorically dense as well, with the overwhelming majority of the calories coming from fat and protein. And it's pretty rich in several micronutrients like calcium, phosphorus, selenium, zinc, and vitamins, so as long as you account for calories, it's a one-stop shop. But the really good thing about cheese is that you don't need very much to enjoy the flavor. another food that's not top tier that I have no shame in enjoying and eating as much as I do. Next up is the one condiment that I have on a regular basis, and that's salsa. Salsa goes with so many different foods that I eat on a regular basis. Most notably, it's my favorite topping for eggs and will always be included in burrito-esque foods. And I gotta say, salsa has no right being as good as it is because it's got such a strong flavor for how low in calories and sugar it is when compared to most condiments. The calories are hardly even something I have to worry about accounting for. But salsa isn't just a calorie-less flavor enhancer, as the most common ingredients have some potent benefits of their own. Typically tomato, jalapeno, lime, onion, and garlic. A handful of fruits and vegetables that I've covered before and had nothing but positive things to say about them. And many other salsas are largely made of mango or strawberry, which are also pretty great, just not typically my go-to. Several of these are a good source of vitamin C, an antioxidant known for several health benefits, including heart health, and a nutrient you're most likely not getting enough of unless you really like certain fruits. And salsa is usually raw, so there's no risk of said vitamin C being destroyed by heat. Many of salsa's ingredients also provide unique beneficial nutrients like lycopene in tomatoes, capsaicin in peppers, citric acid in limes, and allicin in onions and garlic. Salsa is also a natural way to slip in some beneficial herbs and spices. All in all, salsa really is just the best at what it does, and it tastes great too. And the last food I eat almost every single day is Brussels sprouts. Just kidding, that's not it. I enjoy being happy. It's actually beans. I didn't think about just how often I eat beans until I started prepping for this video, but they're just so versatile. I usually go for black beans, pinto beans, or edamame. They're a solid, almost supplemental source of protein and a great source of several micronutrients like certain B vitamins, folate, copper, iron, magnesium, manganese, and phosphorus. What really sells me with beans, though, is again their ease of use. They can be a tasty side dish and a good addition to bowls, chilies, soups, stews, or even salads. A reliable, nutritious, carbohydrate-based filler that I happen to enjoy. Overall, I don't think this video is saying anything too groundbreaking, but I think it's important to discuss
Doing my favorite thing at 7 p.m. as a content creator. Guess what it is? Pitching. Just kidding. Sending professional emails is hard.
Watch any track and field event, and you will notice a profound difference in the body types of long-distance runners versus those who only sprint short distances. While long-distance runners are known for being thin and toned, sprinters present as muscular and ripped, almost looking like natural athletic bodybuilders in many cases. So what's causing this extreme difference in body composition among runners, and how can it be taken advantage of to create a more athletic and healthy body? As opposed to long-distance running and other forms of aerobic training, which use slow-twitch muscle fibers, sprinting utilizes almost exclusively fast-twitch fibers. These muscle fibers, which are also targeted in most strength training exercises, are much larger than slow-twitch fibers, especially when regularly trained. This alone will cause greater increases in muscle mass over endurance-style training, but on top of this, higher intensity, fast-twitch exercises produce more testosterone and growth hormone. This is especially true of sprinting, with increases of up to 2,000% seen in growth hormone production. In fact, I couldn't find any other physical activity that altered growth hormone to this degree. This promotes longevity, injury healing, and fat loss while helping to maintain muscle mass in the process. In a meta-analysis of other studies, sprint interval training was found to reduce body fat percentage 40% more than high-intensity interval training, which is itself known for its incredible fat loss potential. The same meta-analysis also found that compared to traditional long-distance cardio, sprinting decreased body fat 92% more. And on top of this, the sprint training took far less time to complete than either the high-intensity interval training or the steady-state cardio, making it possibly the best minimalist fat loss and body recomposition tool available. Another obvious benefit of sprinting is increased explosiveness and high-intensity endurance, which translates very well to most other forms of athletics and is more likely to be needed in most life-threatening situations than longer and slower-paced endurance. And finally, sprinting increases the strength and efficiency of the spinal engine, a complex system of kinetic energy transfer between the lower body and the spine, which takes part in all other forms of athletic power generation, including upper body movements like throwing and punching, making sprinting ideal for any athlete whose sport requires power generation. If you're new to sprinting, here are a few basic form cues to help you get started. First, be sure to push hard off the ground, with many people finding it useful to imagine that they're pushing the ground back like a cartoon character, as opposed to pushing yourself forward. This strongly activates the posterior chain muscles, which are the main drivers of running speed. Next, be sure to run tall and bring the knees up high off the ground, ideally somewhere at or just beneath parallel with the ground. This allows room for the maximum firing of the posterior chain and maximum extension of the hips. And lastly, stay relaxed. It seems counterintuitive when performing an all-out activity such as sprinting, but efforting at 100% often creates too much tension in the body and stifles speed. I've seen most athletes actually speed up when told to run at 90% effort because it loosens them up just enough to let the body flow with the necessary movements. The most common way to set up a sprint workout is sprint interval training. This can be done a number of ways, but is usually set up as a series of 20 or 30-second sprints with 4 to 5 minute breaks in between each. A common workout would be to start with a 5 to 10 minute jog in order to warm up, then some light stretching or mobility work, followed by 4 20-second sprints with a 4-minute rest in between each, and some light stretching in order to cool down. As you get more used to the training, you can add sprints and begin to increase or vary sprint distances. You can also use variations of sprints to add difficulty and to change the nature of the training. A great example is hill sprints, which are great for building strength in the legs as well as improving sprint technique by increasing the need for knee drive. Sand sprinting is another great option if you have a beach or long sand pit available. Sprinting in sand activates a number of smaller stabilizer muscles in the foot and the lower leg, making it a great way to injury-proof the ankles and knees. Though it can be shocking to the body at first, so start slow, especially if you have ever had a foot, ankle, or knee injury already. Sand running also dampens the impact of the feet on the ground, effectively turning off the elastic rebound used to drive the spinal engine of running. This means the core, and especially the obliques, will have to work overtime in order to continuously rotate the spine, making sand running a great way to strengthen and tone the core. An absolute must if you want Instagram-ready beach pics, or if you ever find yourself scheduled to fight Mr. T for the heavyweight title. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for further videos. And until next time, keep moving, my friends.
Bible is a huge.
Welcome back to Science Click. Today, quantum field theory. Unlike a marble which has a definite position, at the microscopic scale, a particle does not really have a position. Its presence is distributed throughout space with more or less probability. This description of particles as waves of probability is called quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics allows us to describe the evolution of a particle over time. However, this description, as effective as it is, fails to take into account two considerations. Firstly, quantum mechanics cannot describe situations where the number of particles varies over time. However, in nature we often observe that particles can appear or disappear, like when a photon gets absorbed by an electron in an atom. Secondly, quantum mechanics treats each particle independently. However, within a family of particles, such as electrons, all exhibit the same properties and behaviors. How is it that an electron coming from the far reaches of the cosmos has exactly the same mass or charge as an electron in an apple? To answer this question, we will have to build a new mathematical framework. A more general description that reconciles quantum mechanics with special relativity. We will construct the most successful framework available for describing the microscopic world. In this video, we build together quantum field theory. To begin with, let's start with an empty universe. Relativity teaches us that the fabric of the universe is space-time. To simplify, we will represent only two dimensions of space, as well as the dimension of time. We now want to fill our universe with content, matter. We saw previously that all particles of a same type, for example all electrons, appear perfectly identical, as if they were only local manifestations of a single underlying object, which would fill the whole universe. A field. To add content to our universe, we will therefore start by adding a field. In mathematics, a field is like a fluid which fills all space-time, each point of which is populated by a mathematical object. It can be a field of numbers, vectors, or other more exotic objects. That said, special relativity imposes some restrictions. It forces us to respect certain symmetries which correspond to the geometry of space-time. Symmetries of translation, rotation, or changing frame of reference. These symmetries are only respected by certain mathematical objects, and we can classify them with a parameter, spin. The simplest objects that we can use are numbers. We give them spin 0 because when we rotate space around a number, it does not vary. Vectors, on the other hand, indicate a direction in space. Their appearance depends on the orientation in which they are observed. We assign them spin 1 because when we rotate space by a full turn, a vector also describes a full turn. Finally, relativity also allows other more exotic objects, and in particular spinners, which have spin 1/2. You have to make 2 turns around a spinner for it to come back to its initial state. All these mathematical objects seem very abstract, and some are difficult to understand, but technically they all obey the symmetries of relativity, and are therefore potential candidates with which we could fill our universe.
This is the all-electric Nissan Ariya. With dual-motor e-Force all-wheel drive.
In addition to imposing the types of objects that are allowed, space-time symmetries also set restrictions on the way objects behave inside the field. Each symmetry forces the field to respect the conservation of certain quantity over time. To obey relativity, our field must respect the conservation of energy, momentum, angular momentum, and velocity of the center of mass. Moreover, the mathematical objects themselves can contain symmetries of their own. If we decide to form a field with complex numbers, for example, they exhibit an internal symmetry, which implies the conservation of another quantity over time related to the very nature of complex numbers, the electric charge. At this stage, we have a space-time, which we have filled with a field, which satisfies all the restrictions imposed by special relativity. But our goal is to describe the microscopic world, so it's time to turn our field into a quantum field. In quantum mechanics, to transform a classical object into a quantum object, we allowed it to adopt several positions at the same time, with more or less probability. Similarly, to transform a classical field into a quantum field, we allow it to adopt several configurations, multiple ways it can evolve, with more or less importance.